I've shown my hand. I don't know why I'm frightened.
Okay, why are you frightened?
I know my way around here. The cardboard trees, the painted scenes,
Is that a thing?
the sound here.
I still didn't know what you were going to do, and I hated it even more than I thought I was going to.
Yes, a world to rediscover. Is Andrew Lloyd Webber's Sunset Boulevard not common knowledge?
Not for me.
Sunset Boulevard.
That's the
Twisting Boulevard.
That's the part I know.
Hello, everybody. I'm Will.
And I'm Kristen.
And this is So I'm Watching This Show, your twice weekly pop culture podcast where we talk about movies, TV, music, and more. And as always, this is a spoiler show, so you have been warned. On today's episode, we're going to have a conversation about the 1950s cinema masterpiece, cinema classic, Sunset Boulevard. I'll try and stop. I
would love it if you tried to stop.
Yes, you'll read the big black headlines about Norma Desmond and this Hollywood scandal. But you'll never read the true story about the rest of us who were part of it. Me, for instance, Joe Gillis, a promising young writer from Dayton, Ohio. And Betty, that nice kid I met at a Hollywood party, who knew nothing about me. This is a Hollywood story about the people who make the movies. The little ones that you never hear of, like Betty and me. The great ones, like Cecil B. DeMille. All those who knew Norma Desmond, a strange woman who left her mark on all of us.
Come out to see for yourself the film that reaches a new milestone of dramatic daring. The film that every critic says is a giant among motion pictures.
Glenn Close played her in the musical.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How recent was this?
Think the 90s.
Oh, okay.
And then they reprised it, and she did it in the reprisal.
Oh, okay.
Or the, what's it called?
Revival.
There you go. I was like, reprisal's not the word. I love this movie. I almost said, and I don't know why, and I know exactly why. We're about to have a long conversation about why.
We all know why.
It sounds so like...
It's because of Gloria Swanson.
Yes. A huge thing for me is when I was a child, we went to Disney World every spring for like spring break. And so basically from the ages of like 5 on, we would do that. It was a ritual vacation, a pilgrimage, if you will. And the Great Movie Ride had a montage at the end where they played a bunch of, it was a brilliant film montage. They played a bunch of scenes from movies, and this was one of them. They played I'm ready for my close-up.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
But they also played all of you wonderful people out there in the dark.
Mm.
You see, this is my life. It always will be. There's nothing else. Just us. And the cameras. And those wonderful people out there in the dark.
And we didn't need dialogue. We had faces.
We didn't need dialogue. We had faces.
And so it was really ingrained in me for a long time. And I always thought I saw this in school. And Will said that is not the case. And I don't remember the first time I saw it. I think it was possibly just on a whim.
Maybe you first watched it when you were in school, but it wasn't like in
I have
class.
a recollection. Hi, Corey Severi, if you're out there. Out there in the dark. I have a recollection of going to like Barnes and Noble with her a couple times and just sort of like buying, because I bought Barbarella like unprovoked one time. Had less of a success rate with that one.
That movie's not as generally good.
Well, I mean, I was glad to have seen it.
Yeah.
But maybe that was what happened. But I just sort of remember, and I had the DVD, and it was probably like $5 or something. And I just sort of remember being like, this is like a classic movie. And I know like 2 or 3 of the things, so I want to see what it's from. And I remember being really entranced by it.
Yeah. Well, this is only the second time I've seen it.
Really? Okay.
Both of which were instigated by you. I do like it. I have previous experience with William Holden.
I was gonna say, I recall the first time, like you appreciated it, but weren't you a little bit kind of like, ugh?
Well, I was not taken aback. That doesn't sound quite right, but I didn't know how funny it was going to be. I thought it was going to be serious, and it sort of serious, but it's hilarious.
So much so that there was a debate when it came out even in the time, whether or not it was a drama or a black comedy.
It's a black comedy.
It's both. It's melodrama.
Yeah.
I mean, it's noir, that those are bedfellows, but
for me, it's a black comedy because she's also just a loony.
But it's sad.
Well, it is sad because we talked about it. It's sort of like that Lady Gaga, that weird like 5-to-1 skit that she did where she's just like all alone in her apartment.
It was her first time hosting.
Yeah.
And I remember she really brought it.
Yeah, she did.
She had both yellow and Dijon mustard with her. And she did a good job. She did the trademark Gaga overcommitment, but she did impress a lot of people. And the final skit of the night wasn't, I mean, it had laughs in it, but it was really poignant in a way that we don't see a lot from like SNL. And it was her. And then she was with Keenan. And I think it like hit a nerve in a good way with a lot of people. Yeah. And it's that very much is echoing this
for sure.
But I think you need to forget about the past and find something worth living for in the present. All right.
But, my dear man, I do have something to live for. I live for the applause, applause, applause. I live for the applause, applause, live for the applause. Thank you so much. Thank you. I love you too.
But yeah, like I said, I had previous experience with William Holden because he is in one of my all-time favorite movies, Sabrina, with Audrey Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart. And so I like knew who he was, so I was like going into it with that, but like I didn't really know Gloria Swanson, and so I didn't have that.
I don't really know her either, other than this. To my understanding, she's kind of playing herself, a version of herself.
Yeah, she was like a silent film star, and there's like a bunch of cool stuff in the trivia where it was like all of the pictures of Norma Desmond are actually silent film publicity photos of Gloria Swanson. And when she says to the guard at Paramount Studios, there wouldn't be a Paramount Studios without me, the same can also be said for Gloria Swanson, because she was like their biggest star for like 8 years or something. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
We tend to think of history as being self-aware, as knowing its history. And sort of like, I tend to think of old-timey stuff, especially existing before I was alive, as sort of like this nebulous sort of, again, so like it's like, well, we're in the past right now, so this is a foregone, this has already been written. And it's wild to me how much doesn't change and how much has changed. Like the attitudes and stuff, the way they talk about things in this movie in a lot of ways are very modern. Yeah. Like the way they talk about Hollywood, they have this sort of like back in the old days, the good old days, but now it's rotten. Yeah. And we just sort of, no matter what time we're in,
Hollywood is rotten.
Well, but just in general, we really glamorize the distant or the near history or near past rather, and sort of focus on like the chaos of the present. And in many ways, you know, for us right now, you know, we talk a lot about how we're actually living in a platinum age of content, certainly television, maybe less so film. That to me, I think history will tell. Yeah. Because there's actually a book I've been meaning to get for you or talk to you about, where there's a book called, it's like about, I think it's called like The Greatest Year Ever. And it's about all the movies that came out in 1999.
That is the greatest year.
There were so many movies that came out in 1999.
Like people have talked about that. It legitimately is one of the best years of movies that ever came out. Because it's like all kinds of shit like The Matrix and like
Sixth Sense, Gladiator.
So much stuff in 99. Yeah.
But yeah, I remember sort of turning my nose up a little bit to old-timey movies because they feel like they're going to be stuffy. Or for me, especially, I feel like I'm going to be talked down to because I know about the Hays Code. So it's like, I feel like it's going to be really gentle. And watching this movie, I was surprised at how it's almost like, I feel like with old movies, it's going to be like they're in a foreign film, like they're in a different language. And I was surprised at how right there I was. At no point did this movie feel distant or foreign to me.
Well, buckle up, because I've got some movies I want you to watch now.
Okay. And I was surprised at how dark and adult this was.
Yeah.
These are very, very interesting adult concepts and that's the thing about the Hays Code is they frequently say that in many ways it forced artists to be more creative.
Yeah. And more clever in their writing.
Because
he never actually, in that big scene with, what's the character's
Betty.
name? With Betty, yeah. He never is like, I'm having sex with her for money.
I'm a gigolo.
But you know it. You know that that's the case, but he never says the words.
So if anyone is unfamiliar, Sunset Boulevard, it's the story of a relatively young, struggling writer, William Holden, and his car's about to be repossessed, and he had a good script, and now nothing's really working.
He's also about to be evicted from his apartment because he's like 3 months behind on the rent.
And so by happenstance, he's trying to evade repo men, and he pulls into what he thinks is an abandoned mansion on Sunset Boulevard. And it's not. It is the home of fated silent film era star Norma Desmond. And she mistakes him for someone else. And through a series of...
The person that's going to bury her pet monkey.
We'll get to that. I meant to look it up so I could read it, but I have a funny story about that. But through a series of miscommunications, she and not even really miscommunications, but she basically just kidnaps him.
Yeah.
And he sort of is fine with it.
Well, it's like, I mean...
Well, he goes with it. He's not fine with it,
yeah,
but he goes...
He allows it because he's like, well, this is a nicer house than I have, and this is, I can hide out here. He's still working.
She's trying to launch her what does she call it? Because it's not a comeback.
Only asking. I didn't know you were planning a comeback.
I hate that word. It's a return. A return to the millions of people who've never forgiven me for deserting the screen.
She's trying to launch her return to the screen with a self-written epic about Salome, which
Salome.
They pronounce like salami the whole time, and I find it upsetting.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong. I've always known it to be Salome, the Dance of the Seven Veils, which that in and of itself, it's a wafer-thin story. And it's kind of a wafer-thin story that she turns into like a 6-hour epic. And also...
There are script pages everywhere.
The role of Salome traditionally isn't played by a 50-year-old woman. We'll just say that. So he tries to help her, and he becomes entangled in this web of hers. And I think that's really all. That's the basis.
Yeah, I don't think that she does it on purpose. Entangled in a web implies that she laid a trap for him, and I don't think that's true.
She didn't lay the trap, but once he's there, she certainly
closes it right up.
Starts setting traps. The dynamic, I didn't expect the dynamic, especially from the gender place. I didn't expect from the 50s this aging, wealthy, powerful woman, delusional woman, and the younger, kept man.
Yeah,
that felt, I would say, ahead of its time, but I guess not. Maybe that's on me for judging the past. But
well, it was even so much that Montgomery Clift was he quit the production. He was cast instead as Joe instead. But he was also having an affair with a wealthy middle-aged woman, and he didn't want that to come out if people started looking into his life if he got the role. So he left, and they cast William Holden.
That's kind of the plot. He has a friend, Artie, a great guy that doesn't factor into any of the decisions that anybody makes in this movie.
I mean, if we're being honest, Betty only factors in legitimately to that one scene where he is telling her. She doesn't need to exist in this movie until that one scene. He just has to come clean to somebody. I
like Betty, and I think she's a very necessary grounding force in the movie, because the movie is so heightened.
Yeah.
It is, walking a trapeze rope on its toes. And I think having an actual bright-eyed ingenue. And that's the thing, is she's not naive.
No,
she's not. Smart. I mean, she's bright-eyed in the sense that she has a good head on her shoulders. She's beautiful and learns from her mistakes.
Yeah.
Because that's actually, if we're being completely honest, all the iconic moments from this aside, that was the moment that struck me about this movie.
Betty?
Is the scene he has walking the back lot with Betty.
Yeah.
And she tells that it makes me think of Showgirls every single time when he's doing the audition and he tells the girl that like to get her nose fixed.
Yeah.
And she does. And he's like, it looks great, but now your ears need fixing.
Yeah.
Because Betty tells the story about how she's legacy. She grew up, you know, with famous parents or acting parents, I guess.
Yeah.
And that.
Or no, her mom was a costumer and her dad was something else.
Well,
but she grew up on the lot.
Meant to be an actress. And the problem was that her nose was bad. She needed to get her nose done. And so she did. And it turned out that they loved her nose, but they didn't like her acting.
Yeah, she can't act.
Well, they didn't like my nose. Slanted this way a little. So I went to a doctor and had it fixed. They made more tests and they were crazy about my nose. Only they didn't like my acting.
And that is just such an incredible parable for Hollywood.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
also, Nancy Olsen is just cute as a button, and she's the
gorgeous.
The only one that's still alive. I realized who I think she reminds me of in this movie, and it is a mix between Reese Witherspoon and Rosamund Pike. She looks like if you mushed their faces
Reese
together.
Witherspoon. This is one of those that if you're a longtime fan of the show, we talk about this a lot, but I have a fascination with remakes sometimes. This is the kind of movie that in no reality does it need a remake. There's nothing that needs to be there's nothing to, and remakes aren't about improving upon, but I think of remakes as like a different take or a different version. And there's
also, if you'll remember, we had The Boy Next Door just a handful of years ago. It's just an older woman and a young guy.
You lost me entirely. Well, that's the joke. Oh my God, you got to the chase. So I was gonna be like, there's no reason to remake this. There's nothing to do. There's nothing to add, rather. There's because I say something like The Wizard of Oz is ripe for a remake because of all the different ways you can take fantasy and all that stuff.
They also stay remaking that movie, and they should stop for a minute.
Wizard of Oz?
There's so many adaptations of The Wizard of Oz.
Not like a big budget, like Hollywood version.
Well, okay, sure. Like a movie, but it's like there has been like 4 TV shows in the last 10 years.
Yeah, that's not what I mean. But like what I was going to say is I think it would be interesting to see people, different actors take on this role, which is, I guess, where the Broadway show comes in. Sure. Because obviously that's live theater, which live theater needs to be redone. It's not immortalized because, as I mentioned, in 93, Glenn Close played the role. And that's that's brilliant. There's so many people. But the joke I was trying to make, as I said, but if we got it nowadays, it'd be Jennifer Lopez. And like, it would be completely inappropriate.
Amazing. I feel so good about that.
As I was reading a little bit about it before we watched it and before we recorded, this is regarded as one of the best films ever made. And it's also regarded as, by many, to be the best film ever made about Hollywood, because I think it captures both the triumph and tragedy. There's sort of the, like, you see the hustle and bustle and the glamour of Hollywood and the promise. And, the kind of person that I am, I'm not negative. Like, I think that, yes, there's a lot to be lost, but there's also a lot to gain. And some people do get chewed up and spit out by the machine, and some people don't. And because there's Cecil B. DeMille is in this movie as himself, and he's doing great.
He asked for so much money.
Really?
Yeah, for like a cameo, and then they had to get him back to do like one more scene or something, and he asked for like $10,000 more.
And even that stuff like that scene with Joe and Betty on the back lot, you can just see like a dude like kind of in the background painting, and it's just, I kind of grew up in theater and all that, and I can just feel it, like watching some of those scenes. It just aches in like a good way, and I'm like, oh, this is so it. I also really love the like the mythos of old Hollywood. And I find it fascinating how even in the 50s, which is what we sort of considered to be the golden age and the olden times of Hollywood, that even then they still had like the olden times of the silent era.
It's not as good as the silent movies. And it's like,
well, and the silent era was nuts.
Yeah.
If you've seen Singing in the Rain, they touch into it.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, but because that's what it takes place with the transition.
Okay.
But they like the silent era stars, obviously, since they didn't have voice, since they didn't have words, everything was performance based.
Faces.
And the clothes, they look like Bob Mackie Barbies at the red carpet. And they built these mansions, and it was a fucking free for all. The like sex, the drugs, the death, the like those old Hollywood mansions be haunted as fuck.
Oh yeah.
So many dead ingenues.
Oh,
like
yeah.
so many closeted, like, because that's one of the things that I always snicker at in this movie. And the movie doesn't go there. I think it can be read that way. But when Joe first meets Max, and I forget what he says, but he was like, I later found, or I guess I found out he was the only other person in this mansion. And he was like, the first of several things I find out about Max.
Oh, sure.
And of course, that's alluding to the fact that he used to be a director and married to Norma Desmond. But I also think he's gay.
Sure.
I think that was a beard marriage.
Apparently, he hated this movie.
Okay,
it's so weird.
There's never been a masterpiece that the people involved weren't like.
He literally would dismiss it when he got asked about it, referring to it as that butler role. And I'm like, all right, dude, you're in one of the most like critically successful movies in history. It seems like such a weird flex.
So back to the monkey thing, because I was going to touch on it, but I'm going to insist on telling the story that I don't actually remember.
Okay.
So this is going to be disappointing to everybody, but back when IMDb had, I think it was IMDb message boards. It was some message board, and someone had watched Sunset Boulevard, and they were like, I think I get it, but what was like the whole movie? But they're like, but what was the point of the monkey? And someone responded, and they're like, oh, isn't it clear? She was fucking it. And they went on this tangent. And people were actually engaging. And I was like, this person is straight trolling.
This is a troll. Yeah.
This is a straight troll. And it was like the monkeys because she was wealthy and eccentric.
Yeah.
She had a pet monkey. There was no symbolism there. And it just, so now, ever since I read that, every time I watch this movie, I'm like, oh, isn't it clear? She was fucking it.
Zoinks.
So there's that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also love how absolutely gorgeous it is. The sets, the costumes. She has so many dresses.
So many. This is the type of thing where it's like, this is a movie that I wish was in color. You know what I mean?
I would be interested to see a color version.
Yeah.
I don't know that I wish it, because it is so beautiful as is.
Well, no, it's super beautiful, but it's like, I want to know like the precise color of those stupid tiles on the dance floor. You know what I mean?
I really found it fascinating. I appreciate his struggle. He definitely has that like sort of like old timey noir macho quality to him.
Sure.
But I find the romance kind of interesting, and they go into that a little bit more in the musical. Like the musical, the romance
with Norma.
Well, they sort of acknowledge that he is. I guess it's in the movie. They acknowledge that he is fond of her.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's also the kind of thing that it's like I get frustrated so many times watching the movie, because there's so many places that it's just like, oh, this didn't have to end this way. And if she just pulled back like 20%.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like, you can be eccentric. Like, you can be, you're going to get some out of me. I watched The White Lotus.
Oh,
I blew through the whole thing.
Yeah, okay.
And I was going to compare her to Jennifer Coolidge.
Okay.
Where Jennifer Coolidge is like a crazy, older, wealthy woman, but she's the 20% self-aware that she needs to be in order to not actually drown.
Yeah, because that's the thing, is like the whole time Norma Desmond is like, I'm going to be in this movie and it's going to be my big return. And she's that at literally no point is she self-aware enough to be like, maybe I could just like produce this.
Or even just her jealousy.
Yeah.
If she just, because especially when we reached that point, he was content to be a kept man, at least for a while. I mean, I guess he really was considering running off with Betty, which...
I mean, he had his suitcase packed and he was literally out the door.
Well, but that was more her crazy.
Yeah.
Her, the bouts of melancholy is inspired. Like...
Madame has moments of melancholy. There have been some attempts at suicide.
And her performance is so I think it's brilliant. I love it. I'm not criticizing it. But it's one of those things that it's like, I have a hard time imagining the world before it. Like it was just one of those so fully formed, so they break the mold. It's such an unhinged, over the top performance that I feel like only works because of the silent film actress background.
Sure. Because she is very...
The amount of times in the movie that she's...
Yeah.
And just the eyes.
Oh, yeah.
And just the... It's... Because isn't this the same year as Whatever Happened to Baby Jane? We should really do that.
It was All About Eve.
All About Eve.
They were nominated at the same time, Gloria Swanson and Bette Davis, and they split the vote. So Judy Holliday won instead.
Okay, I wanted to go back to Bette because I actually really do like Bette, and I think it's Nancy Olsen's performance. I think they have good chemistry because it's so wild that we know his friend Artie. We know Artie's such a good guy. Artie introduces Bette and Joe, even though they had technically met once before. But both of them go right in. Like, right in. And they're not in private. Like, they're in a very...
No, they're not in private. And Bette is dating Artie.
Yeah, engaged.
They get engaged.
She's engaged at that point. And it is very... he gives large parties, and I love large parties. They're so intimate. I love the two fucking girls on the phone.
So funny. Just giggling their asses off.
Say, when you're through with that thing, can I have it?
It's moments like that where I'm like, that felt like something that would be in a like Judd Apatow movie.
Sure.
And I was like, I love that. I love how much has changed and how much has not changed. But they go right in on each other. And I think it's really interesting that part of me wants to see what would have happened. Like, part of me wants to watch the rest of that movie if Gloria hadn't completely unhinged.
Sure.
Like, how do you feel about the opening, about the knowing he's dead?
I don't hate it.
I'm curious. I don't hate it at all because it's what we have.
Yeah.
Apparently there was another opening where he was like in a morgue. And like the corpses were talking to each other.
I don't like that.
And nobody did. Everybody, it started the movie off as a comedy.
Oh yeah, no, I don't like that at all.
They reshot it.
It does get me into that thing where that one video essay we watched where it's like Tangled is a better movie if you skip the like prologue kind of thing, where I'm like, well, maybe like it would have been better if we didn't know immediately. Although I do love the like, what does he say? He's like, what a doofus, he always wanted a pool or something like that.
The poor dope. He always wanted a pool.
A point your husband made, we watched this with him, and I was very excited for him to watch it. I did that thing that happens very frequently where I'm like, oh my God, it's so good. You're going to love it. Like, we should watch this. And then I get like 20 minutes in, and I'm like, oh, this is about a crazy bitch. He's going to hate this. And he ended up liking it. I think the heightened elements of all of it and the fact that it is so iconic takes the edge off of some of her crazy.
Yeah.
But he brought up a really good point, and I think the intro does it a slight disservice, is that it takes a lot of the tension and a lot of the fear out of the movie.
Sure, it could be a lot spookier if you didn't know he was
because it's not, and it's not. The entire movie's eerie. Like, there's this sort of impending sense of doom in the entire movie. And what Will had said is he was like, the only place I was actually genuinely concerned was when Bette was in the house. And he was like, and that's only for about 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Like it's very
worried
quickly,
something's going to happen to Bette. Yeah.
Because she's,
innocent,
borderline the only likable character in the movie. But there's just so many places that this could have gone differently. And because actually, speaking of your husband, Will, he really liked by liked, I mean the scene where she was putting on the plays, like putting on the performances for Joe.
Yeah, yeah.
And she did the Charlie Chaplin, which, I mean, by all accounts was very good.
Yeah.
And very good on Gloria Swanson, because considering she was in a similar boat, there's a lot of places in this movie where she could have been embarrassed, or she could have been.
Yeah. No, she like went whole hog for it in a way that is like very impressive. And like, I mean, she had sort of resigned herself to being like this, to just being relatively forgotten. And then this script came along and she was like, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. And she fucking did it.
But because he specifically pointed out the music, the music, it is old timey, like vaudevillian music, but it's slightly off kilter.
Open your eyes.
And there's like 2 more places in the movie where that happens, where the music is playing what feels like it should be a standard, like now's the standard love fanfare, but it's
like in a minor key.
Yeah, it's slightly like that Eldritch Taylor Swift, where it was like,
oh yeah,
we dance on to the screeching of the violins. Yeah. And it's the kind of movie that really sticks with me, because I did like it the first time I saw it. I liked it a lot, but it was one of those movies where I just sort of thought about it, and it made me feel weird. Like it made me feel complicated feelings. Sure. And it is one of the movies that I don't watch it too frequently because I don't want to run it into the ground, but I do sort of get something from it every time. And I find it fascinating when something timeless is created. And I do wonder at what point in the process do people know they've made something.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know. I do love to think about that though. Like we talked about the Wizard of Oz for a second. Like, when do you think in the Wizard of Oz they were like, this is going to be a classic for all time?
That one, I would imagine it would be after the fact, because it was on par with so many things that were happening at the time.
Sure.
It's very of its time.
Yeah.
I think a huge facet of the Wizard of Oz's staying power is the fantasy of it. I mean, that's a very me observation, but I think having that sort of fantastical, beautiful, scary, exciting thing, I think it resonates with a lot of people, and the way that we treat it culturally has I think kept it in its place.
Yeah,
but
sure.
I had asked, and to my knowledge, he never answered it. One of the animators from Frozen was doing a Q&A. And I know he had specifically worked on Let It Go. And I asked him that. I was like, at what point do you know you've made something? Like,
because that's the thing, at a certain point, that's just his job. You know, he just does that for his job every day. So some of it must blend, you know?
I would always imagine that it's not as you're doing it. I would imagine there's a short window from right before it's finished, or right after it's finished, to right before the hype.
Okay.
I would imagine for some people, especially something like Let It Go, I remember, because we bypassed Frozen, like the opening weekend or whatever, they released the Let It Go number on YouTube. And I was like, an executive had to have been like,
do this.
Yeah. And that's what got my ass in the theater.
Yeah.
And so at a certain point, even before the confirmation, I think for some things, I think that people
you must have an idea.
And again, I mean, the fact that this is a big Hollywood movie, a big golden age Hollywood movie about a big golden age Hollywood theme stuff, because Hollywood is an Ouroboros of eating its own ass. So.
Fun fact, Gloria Swanson also outlived William Holden in real life.
Yeah, I love it. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. I think you'll like it, and if not, I mean, there's certain movies that I feel like there's no reality where you're like, man, I wish I didn't understand the context of that.
I wish I never saw that classic, amazing movie, even if you don't like it.
And because that ending scene, it's just so, that's we all dance on to the screeching of the violins.
For sure.
And Hedda Hopper is there, and she comes down the stairs, and it's just like,
so good.
Oh, it's like shocking and horrifying, but also kind of gorgeous.
It's like the moment after the last hinge falls off. You can follow us on Twitter at So I'm Watching, or Instagram at So I'm Watching This Show. We would also love some money. So if you are enjoying what we're doing, head on over to patreon.com.
Has an apartment over there, 3-car garage that they're not using, that we could live in while we write the next great.
I own this house.
If you have an apartment over the garage that I can live in while I
do not. But it is patreon.com/So I'm Watching This Show. And then just make sure to like and subscribe below on this YouTube video. And that's it. Bye.